Welcome to the Reinventing Education Podcast. I'm Rob McLeod, joined as always by Brendan O'Leary. And today we are looking at the role of the principal in what we call the counselor-centered school. You might use terms like progressive or, sociocratic schools. And we're going to do a quick comparison how this differs from more conventional principal roles. How are you today, Brendan?
I'm not too bad, Robert. The heat is dying down and winter is on its way. But I feel good about that. How about yourself?
So I'm well. Looking forward to this winter season. So if you are new to us, check out episode 100 to know what we're talking about when we use the terms expert, coach, and counselor. But Brennan, let's take a look at this new idea of what a principal could be in a school. But first, to set the table, let's go back through quickly and look at the expert and the coach approach to what a principal means in those schools, and so we can compare and contrast. So the expert principal, they are the top of the hierarchy. And one of the ways that we often describe the three differences between these three types is to say an expert school organizes itself like a pyramid, the coach like a star with various points of authority, and the counselor like a circle, where it's a flattened hierarchy, so no hierarchy. So in this expert pyramid approach, the principal really is the top of the pyramid. And, they've got the qualifications and experience, they've put in their time, makes them right for the job, trustworthy to hold up the responsibility of the position, capable of wielding authority when tough decisions need to be made. They can be the one to step in and make those decisions. The role comes with a lot of responsibility. It's their job to keep the ship going. I've often heard that term used by expert-leaning principals. They set the tone. They're an upstanding role model when done best and responsible for the people who are below them in that pyramid. They are responsible for the staff and for the students, for their well-being and, ensuring that they are responsible people themselves. So, Brennan, if we move from that, the pyramid, to the coach, which has the star, there is still definitely a top of the authority, which is the principal, if you imagine a star, but the kind of points of the star have spread that pyramid around so that they are not the final say on everything in the school anymore. What do we see in the coach star approach to the principal?
Yeah, where we might have seen that word responsibility, it's still going to appear, but you might hear it was like accountability beginning to replace it. This person now is overseeing things like the accreditation process. They're overseeing teacher evaluations and the professional development of staff, and in many ways starts to look a little bit more like a CEO model. This person might have may have a master's in educational leadership or even a business leaning area, and begin to look a little bit like a manager of a team of teachers and wider staff. The role becomes somewhat administrative, managing people, budgets, legal side of school, the facilities. And in many ways, they begin to leave the curriculum and the teaching and learning part much more to another layer of the hierarchy, whether that's a vice principal or a curriculum coordinator or a team. They continue to set the tone for the staff, maybe with more of a focus on the cultural, like making the cultural part of the school a little bit more visible and setting the tone as an effective and efficient team member. And modeling that for the people within their team. Student learning is a very big part of their primary focus, and particularly the results. So although they may not be getting as much into the day-to-day hands-on lessons, they're very interested in the results of their assessments and how that can be used, how that can be interpreted and analyzed, and whether or not the teaching learning is being effective. And due to the accountable nature of that role, their job is potentially on the line if things don't go according to plan, whether that is results, academics, or whether it's something a little bit more broad and wide relating to the culture. So large changes in what that role represents, although they may still on the surface look quite similar. If you just visit the school, they may have a similar office, they may dress in a similar way, but many, many differences to what that role is and how it functions within the school and within the wider community. And that then takes us on to the counselor-centered school, where there's yet another kind of big change in what this role represents and the function it plays within the school. So, Rob, what are some of the ways that within a counselor-centered school a principal might operate?
So here we're shifting into this idea of the school being organized like a circle, and we are completely flattening those two previous hierarchies. So we no longer have a pyramid, no longer have a star. We've got a circle symbolizing the sociocratic nature, essentially meaning that anybody who is within the circle of the school, so students, staff, admin, even parents, if you are willing to step forward to voice something and put in the work, you have the authority. It's no longer a position in the hierarchy that offers that. You have the power and the possibility to influence the direction of the school. So I think that's important to keep in mind as we look at kind of these two main big points about what is new with the principal. And first of all, you may still have the title or that idea of the role of a principal and perhaps even a vice principal. They might still exist, but everything that we have associated with a principal in both those coach and expert approaches, those will be deconstructed in this sociocratic approach. So all of that authority, all of those pieces that come with the hierarchy will be reevaluated. And all of those pieces, all of that power that had been in that previous role will now be spread and distributed throughout the community. So anything that was historically or traditionally part of the principal now belongs to the school. However, and this leads us to point two, you might possibly still have that person in place or that role in place, but there might not be one person assigned to that. It might not be the principal Skinner of yesterday. But we might still have that role just simply for functional purposes of maintaining integrity of processes in the school, because so much of the school is being run on the sociocratic and shared dialogue approach, that we might need one person to be that kind of final say to ensure that that is running smoothly, that is going on healthily in the school, but also to be the person who is there in emergencies or when there is, that need for a representative of the school for a very specific context. However, like we said, though, that doesn't necessarily have to be one person. This could involve even a revolving number of people or different people adopting different parts of the role. So I guess in short to say, if we combine these two big points together, traditionally there was one person who had all these responsibilities and the things that they oversaw. You might still have that role or a person in place in a counselor approach as a principal, but all of those things that they had historically done might no longer belong to them and might be distributed across the school. Does that make sense, Brendan?
Yeah, it does. But it's a little bit difficult to get your head around if you're just used to one person that does all of those roles. And it's kind of like, I'm thinking of it like, okay, well, we just said, well, the principal is overseeing the assessment process. So finding out, kind of collating data to see whether kids are making progress. Now, from this type of school, it's going to look very different, but there's still some form of assessment. It doesn't necessarily follow that would be the same person that's also going to be signing the insurance documents, or the same person that's liaising with the city about the facilities. As long as someone's doing that role, it can be done by anybody within the community. I think just traditionally in the expert-centered approach and even in the efficient nature of the coach-centered approach, it just made sense for it to be one person doing a lot of these roles. But yeah, a community that's operating can deconstruct and distribute these roles, and many different people can do them as long as they're getting done, as long as they're meeting the needs of the community. And that's something we keep coming back to again and again in these counselor-centered approaches, that it's about meeting the needs of the community. And so basically just what we're doing is breaking these jobs down and letting everyone in the community take various responsibilities for them. Now, sometimes you will still need an external facing person who talks to the school board, if one exists in this sort of school, or the city, the insurance, any accreditation body. So that person might do one or all of those roles, but they're basically just performing the absolute smallest number of administrative roles as possible. Therefore, they're not actually in a position of power per se. They're in a position where they're just another person in the community who, through a democratic and sociocratic decision-making process, has stepped up to take this part of the role. And I think that's really, when we get to the strengths and weaknesses of this approach, I think that's something for a lot of people that's a bit of a challenge for someone to get their head round. And I remember talking to Armin, and, he was talking about his position where he still has that title, but inside the school, it doesn't mean the same thing as the principal's title of the school down the road. Inside the school, in many cases, this person, this principal role, whether or not they have that title, plays almost the same role as all the other adults in the school, which is to meet the needs of the community and to support the inquiries of the students. It's, I guess, another way of saying that they're no more special or important than anyone else. They are an important and special part of the community, but so is every other person in that building. And so, like you said, it's a totally flat, a circle style kind of democratic, sociocratic approach where if that person has a role and anybody in any kind of like a position like that, anything they can do to make sure that everyone in the community has a voice is going to be a big part of the role. But again, that's the role of everyone in the community to make sure that not only is your own voice heard, but the voice of everybody else. So yeah, I think getting your head around what that looks like and what that means. And that also means that whereas maybe a traditional and expert-centered or coach-centered school, the principal might have got into their position through qualifications such as a master's degree, even a doctorate. This is no longer really going to be the case. This person is probably going to just be someone from within the community, and therefore they may not have any particular qualifications or experience. They're just the person at this time carrying out those functions as kind of decided by the sociocratic community decision-making process. Yeah. Does that make sense, Rob?
Barely, but I'm with you. No, of course. We're presenting something that, we don't have a lot of reference points for this. This is a very new idea and a very new approach to school leadership and school management. So we don't have a lot of obvious examples to point to. We don't have 50 years of movie portrayals or things like that that we can easily anchor to. We're trying to describe something that is quite cutting edge here.
And it's on a sliding scale. So the fact is that, there isn't just a school that we say, oh, there's 100%, counselor-centered school. No, of course, there's a sliding scale between schools that are just approaching some elements of this type of education, and they may still have a principle that does look somewhat like the coach model, but as they move further and further into each element of the school and the community embodying this counselor-centered approach, it's likely that role will play less of an authoritative hierarchical role and become embedded into the community and deconstructed in that sense, that all of the parts of that job are now done by various members of the community. So this sounds like it has a lot of moving parts, Robert. What's some of the potential babies, as in wonderful things about this approach to leadership?
Yeah, well, some of the good things and also just new things, just this idea that there is not a boss. You don't have a layer of hierarchy over top of you. And one of the positives of that is that there's no one person also now as the scapegoat that all that pressure falls onto. We're sharing responsibilities. And, this is one of those things that we hear a lot in the coach-centered schools is just that sheer stress and overwhelm when all of that pressure is falling on the shoulders of one person. in some contexts, that can be just way too much for someone. So the idea that as we move from coach to counselor, we're sharing that load across several people, I think that can be seen as a positive. We are removing, I guess, where the coach or expert schools can go wrong, where we are removing a hierarchy of incompetency in the sense that we are relying largely, mostly in the expert and to a lesser degree in the coach, on one person and their judgment to be making decisions for an entire community. And of course, there'll be some things they get right and some things they get wrong. And here we're removing that one person from making incorrect or incompetent decisions, which I think is a positive. We are genuinely owning things together. So we're likely to put more critical thinking and emotional intelligence into the daily operations of work. Just simply put, if the sociocratic approach of discussing things together and finding ways to consent to ideas together, we're shifting that deference to an authority back to some more autonomy amongst ourselves. And it's also relying on more skills from ourselves, which I think is positive. We definitely have the potential for a stronger community because of that, by having more empowered members who are doing the work, putting themselves forward, and making the vision for the school that they want. And also possibly, not a guarantee, but possibly reducing administrative bureaucratic layers. So because we're allowing more time and resources to be dedicated to the actual process of education, the inquiries that students are working on, potentially we're spending less time in power struggles, less time having to follow, hierarchical procedures to a T. Potentially, we have more time dedicated towards the actual education of the students. So those are the good things. But as always, might be some bathwaters here, Brennan. What might those be?
None, Rob. This is the one. There's nothing bad about this. Nothing could go wrong.
Moving on.
Yeah, absolutely. The very notion of this, I'm sure, strikes terror into the hearts of many people. The idea of you're just going to remove the hierarchy completely. Yes, sure, there's a lot of parts of hierarchy that are incompetent. The Peter principle is something I have enjoyed finding about it recently, which is that you keep getting promoted until you can no longer do the job. Therefore, the entire organization is full of people who are one step higher than they should be. But having said that, removing that entirely, no, that hierarchy, there's a lot of competent people doing a lot of good stuff to keep this ship sailing and steering right and true. And now there's no one steering. This is just absolutely, we are potentially just going over the edge of the cliff. And one of the things about the expert principle is this idea that they'll collect ideas, they'll talk to people, they'll work at what the right thing to do by consulting with wise people in the community and experts and so on, and that's gone. So who is that voice of reason now? Who breaks the tie when we can't decide? Sure, there's democratic and sociocratic ways, but having that one person you can trust to really take on board everyone's ideas and then be the sage, wise person to break that tie, that's something that gives a lot of comfort to a lot of people. Also, this process, a common argument against this process of more democratic, sociocratic decision making is that it's chaotic, it's messy, it takes way longer. There's not really any checks and balances to stop us just making a series of really bad decisions that just totally wreck everything that we built. And there's a potential that we're just patting ourselves on the back for having these wonderful democratic processes without actually seeing whether they work. So we're valuing the process over the product. And although there's a lot of good in valuing process, it has to be successful at the end of the day. It has to be safe and orderly and achieve what we're trying to achieve. Without that, we are not fulfilling our roles as educators. We're not meeting the needs of the community. And of course, this no longer having somebody who's tidying up all those administrative tasks and taking that burden on their shoulders, that means, oh, well, that's now shared between the entire community. So now everybody on top of the job they're already doing has to do a bunch of additional roles to keep the kind of community going. So, you can promise us all day long about how we're going to have so much more time to do our work, but how is that possible if we're suddenly having to spend so much more time making decisions and taking on board all of these tasks that were previously been done by one person? So, yeah, Rob, I'm afraid to say it's not all going to be plain sailing.
Yeah, it's an attempt to solve some challenges from the previous two approaches to the principle. It's doing something new. It's bringing new things to the table. It's allowing for a new style of how a school organizes and who gets to decide who gets to decide. But at the end of the day, yeah, it's also going to bring new problems that perhaps someone down the road might be able to solve with a new approach that even reinvents this.
It's definitely got a lot of interesting ideas. If you're suddenly making all these decisions and so empowered, and it goes hand in hand with the type of education that is entirely led by the students' kind of inquiries and where they're going and the community needs, and it's very, very appealing. The question, as always, is, are we ready for it in 2024? What happens when the rubber meets the road? We've seen, we always harken back to the School Circles documentary and our chats with Armin, who do seem to be pursuing these paths, and very inspirationally so. I have a lot of hope that we can adopt in our schools the best parts of this approach. What can I say, Rob? I'm an optimist.
Optimus Prime, a prime optimist. Thanks,
Aye.
Brennan.
Thanks, Rob.